Hi guys! Come with us on a trip to Texel to do some research. Here we stand at the Wadden Sea, a highly dynamic ecosystem shaped by tides and waves that are constantly changing the coastline. With sea level rise, coastal erosion and floodings are becoming a bigger challenge every year.
Luckily, nature has its own defense to stabilize sediment and reduce erosion.
Like mussels that form dense clumps that keep sediment in place.
Or the salt marsh plants that weaken wave energy, increasing the strength of the soil and influencing the marsh edge.
These organisms are called ecosystem engineers as they shape and protect their own environments.
However, we currently have a limited understanding. We don't fully know how resilient these organisms are under different inundation conditions, and that's exactly what we're investigating here on Texel.
So what are we waiting for? Let's dive in!
The research question that we want to answer is: what is the erosion resilience of salt marsh plants and mussels under varying inundation exposure?
To answer this question, we divided it into two sub-questions. How does different inundation exposure affect erosion in salt marsh plants? And the same goes for mussels.
Our hypothesis is that mussels and salt marsh plants exposed to more frequent flooding will develop a stronger attachment to the sediment, making them relatively more resistant to erosion.
Okay, so we just did research on the mussels. And Anna is going to tell us how that went.
Well, we tried to do research on the mussels, but it did not go very well. So we had to really go into the field without taking the rocks with us, and our Newton meter was too weak for the mussels, so we couldn't measure the force. After this tragedy, we looked into various ways to make our research for the mussels still possible. However, in the end, we ran short on time.
We will take samples of glasswort, a salt marsh species that is abundant on Texel and relatively easy to identify.
The samples will be taken from a higher and lower inundation exposure points and will include both the plant and the soil in which it's rooted.
We transported the plants and the soil in decapitated syringes in buckets. This is a bit of a challenge on the bike due to the wind, but we tried to keep the samples as stable as possible.
Here you can see our lovely Excel sheet. There are some highlighted in yellow. Those were our outliers, as they were either too big, too small, or we thought they were unreliable. Therefore, we're going to use them as our testers.
In the lab tent, we applied our treatments. For this experiment, this was sediment removal of 0, half and 1 centimeter of sediment. We made sure that the people testing the force were unaware of which sample was given what treatment. Then we measured the force using an analog Newton meter while someone was recording on video to make sure we could see the exact amount of Newton that was being used.
We used a two-way ANOVA test in our studio to process our data. After making sure that the residuals of our data were normally distributed, we had enough replicates per treatment, and that the various were homogeneous, we ran the test. As you can see, the residuals are near perfectly normally distributed. After running the test, we saw that there was no interaction between the sediment treatment and inundation in combination for the measured Newton. Additionally, the sediment treatment didn't have any significant effect on the measured Newton. It was, however, shown that the inundation had a statistically significant effect. Plants with low inundation history are stronger than plants with a high inundation history. We also wanted to double-check that the length of the plants didn't act as a confounder in our original ANOVA test, so we performed another two-way ANOVA and were able to confirm that it had no statistically significant effects.
The strength of our study was the use of pilot tests, as it improved our methodology by pulling the plants horizontally to better mimic the erosion forces. The limitation was that we did not measure the root characteristics separately between the high and the low inundation. Therefore, we do not know if the anchoring strength was caused by the difference in root development between high and low inundation.
Earlier research by Menzel discussed the trade-off salt marsh plants face between waterlogged soil and hypoxia on one end and competition on the other. This results in employment of different rooting strategies, which can give some species an advantage in certain conditions. Saliconia grows relatively shallow roots to avoid hypoxia. Several studies have shown that low inundation stress promotes vegetation and root growth, which leads to stronger binding to the sediments. This explains the relatively high anchoring strengths of plants with low histories of inundation.
We concluded from our results that salt marsh plants from low inundation environments had a significantly higher attachment strength than plants from a high inundation environment. This means we have to reject our hypothesis. In fact, according to our results, the opposite was proven. These findings provide a new insight into the erosion resilience of salt marsh plants on Texel.